podcast. My name is Rose Luckin and I'm your host. Today, we're diving deep into AI's educational promise and pitfalls with two distinguished guests. I'm delighted to be joined by Harvey Trump, Educational Consultant for Global Educational Consultancy in Egypt, and Avani Higgins, Director of School Improvement at the Leather Sellers Federation of Schools. So welcome, Harvey and Avani. It's really delightful to have you in our podcast studio today. And I'm going to get straight down into the questions here because I really would like to know a little bit about yourselves and what you're doing, your role in your organization, and then what's happening for you. What are you seeing when it comes to AI's current presence within schools, your institution, schools you're working with? How deeply has it penetrated? Are some people engaging, some people opting out? What are you seeing happening and what are you experiencing? Avani, to you first, please.
Hi. So yes, firstly, thank you for having me. My role is Director of School Improvement, and I joined here in September, ex-head teacher, came in apparently because of, well, hopefully because I could do the job, but actually because I spoke quite a lot about how I've used technology in particular to reduce stress on teachers, actually make us more efficient, and how it's really helped me to do a lot of the jobs that we used to do with paper and pen and a calculator. So I got given the task of being in charge of the digital strategy. So we're a federation at the moment of three secondary schools with a sixth form and 2 primary schools. So there's 5 schools in total. And really what I've been doing since September is really trying to get the pulse of the school in terms of Edtech and AI, and also do quite a lot of due diligence, not just inside the school, but actually in the educational space. What are other people doing? And what, where can we collaborate? Because it seems to me that we're talking a lot about Edtech and AI, but it seems to be proliferating at a rate that I can't keep on top of. And so with any change strategy, the sort of the due diligence stage needs to be really evidence informed and, talking to other people who have done it. But actually what I've found is that there's not an awful lot of people that have put policy or strategy in place. There's a lot of discussion about what shall we do, and some institutions are a little bit further down the line than we are. So at the moment in school, I've worked on an implementation plan, which is taking into account, the costs of making sure we've got the correct infrastructure in place, the costs of trying to get one-to-one devices for the students, a lot of due diligence on AI, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it, the implications of safeguarding digital safety for the students and for, how the staff use it and all the implications of that as well. I know that it's popular. I know AI is out there. I know that it's, it's your phone's listening and, all sorts of algorithms are looking at what you do and sending push notifications telling you to buy this thing that you've only just thought of. So it's there. And we know the students are also using AI. We used to joke about how students are digital natives and they are ahead of the game, unlike some of us old codgers who are trying to catch up. So actually understanding how they are using AI to produce pieces of work and organize themselves in a safe way is actually a bit of a minefield. So I sound really negative. I'm really excited actually about the possibilities that are there, but we are taking a very pragmatic approach at the moment, just feeling our way, getting people to come and talk to us about what they've done and what the possibilities are, and then working on policies and processes so that we have a principled approach to our digital strategy, which I think it will take 3 to 5 years before we're anywhere near, some of the first markers that we want there. And it's really hard to do because I'm sure we'll touch on this, but in the educational space, there's a lot of initiative fatigue. We're just getting over the pandemic and everybody being online and talking about the lessons that we've learned from the pandemic. And now we're facing what seems like exponential growth in the Edtech space, and there's a lot of fear around it. So yeah, spinning a lot of plates, I think, is a good summary of what we're doing at the Federation.
That resonates so well with quite a lot of what I'm hearing. And I think it is really difficult. I think you're right. It's hard to keep up with the proliferation of AI. We find it hard, and we're working in this space all the time because there are so many changes. And it's not just the development of the AI, it's the regulation around it, it's what people are doing. And one thing that I've noticed is a real lack of evidence about the impact, which makes it very difficult for people to do due diligence, as you've been talking about, Avani. So I think your approach seems very wise to me. I'm interested in so much of what you said, but one quick follow-up question. The cost implications. I was having a conversation with another director of innovation of a multi-academy trust recently, and they were saying it's virtually impossible to calculate the return on investment, because it's hard to calculate what the actual investment is in the first place. So what's your impression of the cost, both in terms of
it's huge.
Money and time, and of course time is money.
Yeah. It's actually an unknown. It's an unknown known, in that we know, that we are going to need to get the back-end infrastructure in place. So we've been working on things like making sure we've got really solid Wi-Fi in the school, refreshing all the tech that we've got. It's ancient, some of it. So it's got to be a rolling program of investment there, and actually thinking about the shelf life of some of the things. Do we go to Google Chrome devices, or do we not? What are the implications of both? And then, in terms of digital poverty of our students, the Sellers Federation, we're in South East London, working in some deprived areas, juxtaposed with some fairly affluent families as well. And so, there are so many considerations. And then, of course, against the backdrop of budgets where we have to manage all the things that society is throwing us at the moment, the SEND issues, disadvantaged children, rising cost of living, et cetera, et cetera. So I used the term initiative fatigue earlier, but actually we haven't got a magic money tree. And what we're trying to do is sequence what are the important things that we need to get in place right now. So, it's the infrastructure while we do the due diligence. And then it's going to be a very careful approach of what can we afford as we go forward. Interestingly, I went to a conference last week on AI where a group of people, and I've forgotten their name and I will try and remember, are talking about all the different EdTech pieces of software they use, for example, for data, and working on ways to integrate the different things that we've all bought into in a single point of truth that's going to help the Federation, which sounds brilliant. But my first thought was, right, what's that going to cost in order to, to get there?
Yeah.
So I haven't really, I think I've dodged your question, because what I'm saying is I don't know. What I know is that it's going to cost a lot of money, and we're going to have to really carefully balance other huge priorities with trying to move into this space.
That is a very good answer. I wasn't really expecting you to be able to say, well, actually, it's going to cost me £10,000 a month this year, or whatever, because I think it's too early to know. But I really like this approach. While you're doing your due diligence, you're trying to get the infrastructure in place, because one thing's absolutely clear, that when I'm talking to people, those people who've got their technology infrastructure, but in particular their data infrastructure in order, find it much easier to leverage more impact from AI. So it makes perfect sense. Thank you, Avani. That was really helpful. Harvey, over to you now. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're seeing when it comes to AI use?
As I say, my background is over 30 years in education in the UK and now in the Middle East. Predominantly in the last 18 months, I've been involved with setting up schools. So really at the sort of the foundational end of what Avani mentioned, where she is sort of probably a few years ahead of where I would be. And I love to have conversations around sequencing, about pragmatism and the like. And I couldn't agree more with setting up those foundations properly. I got an interest, but I thought, well, if we've either got to go with the flow or we're going to be left behind. So I wrote a paper for my staff over a year ago now, and as I say, it soon gets dated, and subsequently have set up policy and tried to look at strategic plans to establish something in those schools. Because where I am, it's slightly different in respect of, obviously the cost resonates across all of the countries that we're involved in. Egypt more so recently because of the financial crisis and the horrible financial inflationary increases in the exchange rate, which has caused a lot of spending that we can't do outside with external agencies. So we're even more limited, not just by cash and cost, but even by the financial exchange. So, for example, just something as simply as trying to renew my Microsoft subscription for my family. That got rejected by my bank, even though it was sort of the equivalent to $70. Then they're not doing any foreign exchange rate. So for a school, that's just exemplified and magnified. So from that perspective, it's difficult. So yes, I mean, there's that economic crisis post-pandemic scenario that is emerging. I agree with really everything Ivani said. Here, as I say, there's a slight difference. Is the fact that our infrastructure, our Edtech infrastructure, isn't probably as strong and as advanced as other places. So what I'm talking about is a real culture change in respect of trying to motivate staff. It's there. Certain parents and pupils are aware of it, but I don't think the awareness is as great as in the Western side of things, where it has been much more prevalent. Upskilling staff, getting staff tuned into what AI can do. So I've done a little bit around three platforms, I suppose. Ross McGill's Teacher Toolkit, and the use of AI in planning. As I say to all my staff, let's work smarter, not harder. I'm a Magic School trainer, which is more the American curriculum. And I've also got involved with a gentleman called Kevin at School AI, who's the deputy CEO. And he's open to, they've just got 2 million student users, and he's open to expanding his School AI to all curriculums. So it's been a nice conversation and be able to get into sort of these initial periods. So much of this also resonates with me as a safeguarding trainer. A long time ago, the CWDC, I did a training course with them. So I've been able to safeguard train, governing bodies right through to staff. And I think, it's the limitations, but it's like everything. If you put a sign up, don't walk on the grass, everyone walks on it. So if you say, like some of the American schools have done, don't use it, we're not going to use it. It's just going to be a proliferation of everyone using it. And it's all going to be undercover and secret. So I think we have to stay open. We have to stay open-minded. We have to move with the times. So for me, the infrastructure, I agree, is vitally important. And we've got a policy around it. So what I've tried to do, it's the upskilling of staff and students that has become more important as an emphasis for myself, just simply because they need to be aware of it, because if we don't make them aware of it, it's going to be even harder to introduce them to as the technology gets more and more difficult or more and more easy to use. I don't know. It depends how you look at it. But I think that's the key for me. We've also got a limited sort of infrastructure and Wi-Fi and things like that here. So that does limit some of it. They did block ChatGPT when it first came out, and there are certain blocks on restrictions on certain other avenues. However, the main ones are now a little bit more open, but we are just a little bit slower in our uptake. But no, I agree with what it's about. It's about our IT capability. It's about having a dialogue, and it's about collaboration. And in the schools that I've been involved in, what we're trying to do is set up an AI committee and have champions on that committee. We all have our tech nerds in our schools. And the schools I've worked with, that's what we've tried to do is set up them and then let them champion it alongside more of us following it and sharing what is coming out. It's coming out so quickly, and some of it is good. Some of it is pedagogically unsound. Some of it is pedagogically very sound. I've tried to stay with the pedagogically sound aspects, hence Teacher Toolkit, School AI and Magic School. Have been the main dominants. And as I say, the catchphrase or buzzwords for me are let's work smarter, not harder to the staff.
I agree. I think that's really important, Harvey. And I think your approach of setting up committees and sharing is so important. I agree. You need to know. I love your, don't walk on the grass analogy. You want people to walk on it, but you want them to tell you they're walking on it.
Exactly.
Because if people don't tell you what they're doing, you don't know whether they're doing something within the parameters of what you've decided is acceptable for your organization. I think it's really useful for us to have your international perspective. Interestingly, when it comes to devices, the UK or England has one of the highest ratios of device to student in the OECD. However, we also have one of the least evenly spread devices. So we might have a lot of devices, but they're quite concentrated in particular pockets. So we still got a lot of students without devices. So yes, we do have more, but it's not evenly spread out. And I think, that weaker technical infrastructure does present a challenge, but I really applaud your approach to that of focusing on upskilling, because you're right. If you can build the skills, build the motivation, build the appetite in staff and students, then when they do get access to the technology, they're ready to go, aren't they? Do you find reticence? I suspect you don't find reticence amongst the students, but you might find some reticence amongst the staff.
I think to answer your question, yes, especially some of the older staff who I've always done it this way and I'm not going to change. But I keep saying to them, but how you've done it takes hours. I can save you certain hours so you can have more time with possibly grandchildren, but family. Hence the sort of the catchphrase, used very often with me is working smarter, not harder. And, that's what I've sort of tried to embody for staff. Look, I can save you time. So even if you haven't done it this way, have a look, whether that's, just a simple form of MCQ and multiple choice questions, or whether it's just planning, have those ideas and annotate them. We're not asking you to do much, but it'll do it for you. You'll be able to sort of type in what you want. It'll do the objectives. Go make yourself a cup of tea, come back and annotate it. And that hour's work where you've sat there trying to devise the objectives and maybe some of the collaborative learning that you want to go on in the classroom, or the adaptive teaching, as it's now being termed, as opposed to differentiation, then it saves you time. And if you don't like it, then put your own ideas into it. And as I said, as sort of, with an inspection experience as well, for me, it's not about the lesson plan per se. It's about how you annotate and utilize the information that's coming. And I think this is the fundamentals for me for the use of AI at the moment. It's, let's use AI significantly. Let's use it well, but let's adapt and adopt our procedures to fit with the context of what we're using it for. Because what it will come out with, not only as a hallucinations, but equally, it'll also come out with a lot of generic. That's fine, but let's add the detail. We've got experienced educators on the staff, so those committees can go back and, if you're leading English, let's say in Key Stage 1, or in elementary in an American system, share the English lesson plan, and let's all have an input into it.
I think that
it makes a huge difference.
I think that sharing is so important. You're right. And I always say to people, think of it as a really fast, really enthusiastic assistant, but you have to keep an eye on them and check their work, a lot of the time. Now, both you and Harvey have mentioned safeguarding. And as we often point out to people, there is no risk-free AI. Even the people who are developing these large language models, if we're thinking about generative AI, don't really understand how they work. We're seeing research paper after research paper coming out from universities, coming out from the companies themselves, saying that they're discovering things about these models because they don't really understand them. So it's a real challenge, isn't it? Trying to navigate the risks, and yet we must do that if we're going to reap the benefits. So thinking about safeguarding in particular, Avani, you've mentioned it, Harvey's mentioned it. What's your perspective on how you're thinking as you're planning? And I heard what you were saying about you're currently doing due diligence and you're looking at infrastructure and kind of building your plan. But what's your thinking when it comes to AI safeguarding?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And it's one of those things that keeps me up at night. I often think of, Asimov's I, Robot, what are the possibilities? And that's kind of the issue. I sort of alluded earlier that we know that students are already using AI. Now, at the moment in school, we haven't enabled AI, and only staff have access to it, and not all staff at this stage. Again, just really being pragmatic while we work out what's what. One of the things that we are working on is this idea of digital literacy within the curriculum. And I've always been, through my years of teaching, we've often talked about a holistic curriculum that gets them ready for the 21st century world. It's that sort of thing that people often say, but I've been unpacking with the staff, what does that really mean? Our job is, yes, to educate them academically, but actually upskill them for life. And they're going to be leaving into a world that's bristling with technology, some of which hasn't been invented yet. So actually, these are skills, these are life skills, critical thinking in terms of digital technology. I worry, for example, if they're using AI to do all of their thinking, are they developing the neural pathways they need in order to think? Or are we sending them out into a world where you won't have to think quite so much because the AI will do it? So these are all the sort of, it's not necessarily safeguarding I'm talking about here, but I'm sort of thinking more in the roundabout some of the worries regarding AI. Also, what I'm getting at is that we're working on a digital character curriculum, and within that will be, the things that we talk about, how to keep yourself safe online, which they do through the PSHE curriculum, but I think heavily needs looking at again, and bringing in some of these issues that I'm talking about, but also equipping them to spot bias. I'm a history teacher. We're always looking at the reliability of the evidence that they're looking at, newspapers, articles, did Stalin mean this when he said this? But actually, I think a huge part of our curriculum now needs to look at Edtech, AI, and whether it is safe to make assumptions from it. And so all of that to say is that what I'm talking about is, alongside the academic curriculum, we need a digital curriculum whereby the offer is that we are getting them ready for that space. So are they IT literate? Do they have access to a one-to-one device? Have they been taught how to keep themselves safe online? Do they have the skills to think for themselves rather than relying on the AI? That's a huge piece of work, because it involves actually a completely reimagining of what a school curriculum should look like. I'm not saying I've got all the answers. I've got a lot of questions. But what I'm talking about is a digital emotional intelligence, I guess, so that they can do all of those things. I don't want to get into plagiarism, but there's also all of those things as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's really interesting to think of it as part of the curriculum. And I think there are some really important discussions to be had. You're right around bias, about what the technology can do, what the technology can't do. But something else you said, I think, is also super important. And that's when you were talking about building the neural pathways, because a lot of the rhetoric, and we saw it really clearly with Apple Intelligence, who described what they were going to be providing you with is the opportunity to do things effortlessly.
Yeah.
Learning doesn't come from being effortless. It really doesn't. It takes strenuous mental effort. And I think there is a risk we won't build those all important neural pathways, but also a risk that if we inappropriately offload our cognitive activity to the AI, because the AI is always so keen to do it, isn't it? That actually we will no longer be able to do those cognitive activities. And maybe that's acceptable. We look at what's happened to our brains because of the use of GPS, and our memories because of the use of Google, for example. There's increasing amount of research in that area. Maybe we're okay with the navigation thing. Maybe we're not. But we certainly need to think, don't we, about what we do let the AI do, because once we stop doing it, we will quite quickly evolve not to be able to do it. So it's quite a difficult time, isn't it? So I think having it in the curriculum and having those meaty discussions sounds really important to me.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing to say is that, we're of a certain age and have grown up differently. We chalk and talk. I've been doing this 32 years now. I came to this point differently to our young people. And so I worry about I can't find the word. I'm just worrying about some sort of brain atrophy where if they're not using it, what will happen to them. So that is such a huge part of where we go. So it's bigger than safeguarding, but obviously online safety, using AI safely, is a big meaty area of discussion. And again, what I haven't got at the moment is somebody signposting me and saying, here's something we have developed. Would you like to come and work with us? So that's where all the due diligence is coming in to grapple with some of these issues.
Yeah, that's so important and really interesting to hear your perspective on that. Thank you, Avani. And Harvey, back to you. You mentioned safeguarding as well. So I'm really interested in how you said you were a safeguarding trainer. So how can you encompass AI within that safeguarding perspective, do you think?
As I say, it's got to be done. Just like, go back sort of to when Google first came out in coursework and the demise of coursework. It was very interesting just, hearing Avani and what she said. I do think that creativity and analysis, the top end of Bloom's taxonomy, can be utilized exceptionally well using AI. I don't think the creativity will be lost. And this is why the teachers are upskilling and then learning to use it and not be reliant on it is fundamental, I think, to the success of it. Brainstorm the class first for ideas, and then let's get that prompt right. If that prompt's right, there'll be creativity in the prompt. And from the creativity, they might come out with ideas that you'd already thought of and some different ideas. And at that point, it's then choice. So I think a lot of the creativity, the analysis is there in choosing the right pathway. And the evaluation will then come through the implementation. So I do think the creativity will remain, and it comes down to how we utilize and share how we use it, and not just use it as something that is just there or that'll make our life easier, but actually use it sort of, not to, and it's never intended to replace us. And there's been lots of research and studies saying that, it's not there to replace us, it's actually there to motivate and maybe think of aspects that you haven't thought of before.
Yeah, that's music to my ears. I think it's there we should see this as a moment when we become more intelligent because we have this technology.
And we've had to do it with the Gen Z population. I mean, we're having to look at the ways that they're going into the workforce. We know they've got shorter attention spans, but we also know that there's lots of multitasking where they can do 2 or 3 things at once. So we've got to adapt just as they have with what we've had to do in the last 10 years. And like Avani, I've got over 30 years experience. So I mean, between us, we've all come from it almost the same way. And we're having to just roll with the times. But I think from a safeguarding perspective, I mean, a lot of it is coming out through keeping children safe in education. That had a revamp last year with regards to making sure your DSL was more aware of the barriers to stopping infiltration and how your system works within your school. And there's a slight update in the new 2024 version whereby we're going to have to look at AI, and AI is now part of what they're talking around when it comes to images and abuse and things like that. And they've actually now started to insert the word AI to be recognized. So I think from that point of view, it's there. We will be led partly by policy. I mean, because we are, even with international school, many of our schools are CIS or Cambridge related. If you go to the American schools in NEASC, they are the stepping stone to CIS, Council of International Schools. So there's an awful lot of reference back to the UK because the UK seems to be driving a lot of the policy around that, around the Safeguarding Alliance and the like.
Yes.
So I do think safeguarding will be shared with us, but I think we've got to put those places in place now So it's not a surprise, making sure that, and it goes back to the children's education as well as the staff's education of this. I mean, I've used Common Sense out of Harvard and Project Zero.
Oh, yes.
And they really are switched on, as are sort of some of the Microsoft Wellbeing EQ that Vani mentioned earlier, the Microsoft monsters for your self-analysis about how you feel. So, I mean, I think there's plenty out there. I think, it comes back to what I said earlier about making sure that we don't give them such a breadth of information about the number of tools that are out there, but actually just handpick those we think are pedagogically more sound. Yes, it's subjective. And then, if you've got a little committee running, they'll come out and we'll agree what we think is best. And I think each school will then come out with its own design. But I do think it's important. But again, it comes down to teaching the children, just like it was using the internet. I mean, I remember the internet at the school that I was working at. I typed I was looking for something at a Middlesex school, but it was banned because of the last three letters, the last three letters of the word. And why? But I think things will evolve, and I think barriers and things will do it. I mean, the big concern that seems to be coming out at the moment from a safeguarding perspective is the imagery and the imageries around the videos and around sort of, what you can do with images and just make them very sexual or even
there have been
otherwise. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's where we are at the moment with the developing technology. But I think, if we educate the children, and again, go back to my, walking on the grass analogy, I do think that if we tell them that this is out here, this is what you shouldn't do, just like we have done with Google and the like, then I think we'll go some way to preventing some of the horrors that will happen. But children will be children. They will want to investigate things. So we have to use it with them to show them how to investigate. And I think that to me is the fundamental outset of where we need to drive this.
I agree. I think it's setting the parameters and then helping them to stay within them. Thank you, Harvey. That's great. Spot on. Avani, final question to you, because as always, we run out of time on these podcasts and we never get to talk as much as we'd like. It's going back to something that you said earlier, actually, about due diligence. And I mentioned that I felt there was a shortage of evidence about how the AI is or isn't impacting positively or negatively. I'd like to explore that a bit more with you. It was interesting what Harvey was just saying about trying out tools that you can see are pedagogically sound. You can make a certain number of judgments yourself, can't you? You can say, is it pedagogically sound? Okay, yes. You can check whether the technology is robust. Yes. You can look at the local regulations, so GDPR, for example. So you can do a certain amount and you can review things yourself, any Edtech product, whether it involves AI or not, and you can share that with other teachers. But how are we really going to know what the impact of these AI tools are in your planning? How are you thinking about that kind of evaluation piece so that you can constantly be collecting information about what your experience is? Because I think our experiences are really important and it's important to share them with each other.
We, like any change project, there's a lot of stakeholder voice at the moment. So lots of working parties involving students, teachers, early careers teachers and those that have been here a lot longer, really trying to get a sense of what works for them and what doesn't, and then going out to other conferences, other schools. And, I'm a real believer in collaboration and finding out from each other what people are doing. I think how I want to approach it is what I do with change projects, which is to sort of pre-mortem as far as we can. So in other words, when we're at the planning stages, work with the end in mind, as far as you can know. And then as you go along, that's what your stakeholder feedback and your data and the various quality assurance things that you're going to do will tell you whether you're steering a path to that. But what I'm imagining is, because this is unlike any other thing that I've done, is because the end keeps moving. Doesn't it? And that's the difficult bit. You can never say, yes, we have realized our vision, or we have grasp it. I think it's going to be much more nuanced than that, and it will be borne out by the outcomes of the students, what the students say. It will be borne out by staff's engagement. Things like if Harvey was talking earlier about working smart, and I love that, because I think that that's really, really important. So, for example, I've used Google workflows in the past to reduce the amount of time it takes to crunch and triangulate data. And when I used it and then rolled it out with the staff, they reported that their mental health improved because they weren't putting in the hours and hours and hours actually sorting out the data. They were working on the analysis, and that freed them up. So I think it's those softer things that's going to be helping you with your due diligence and telling you whether you are successful or not. But I think there's an immense pressure with any strategy, any digital strategy, with actually saying whether we have been successful or not, apart from the things that I've said. Are you delivering on some of the areas that you thought at the beginning of your project and your due diligence? Are the children more engaged? Are staff feeling better about their work-life balance? Are you managing to reduce costs because you've managed to integrate some of the systems that you've got? Do students have access to devices? And, for me, one of my goals is Pearson Education is talking about taking everything online. So one of the pieces of due diligence I'm doing is working for the English exam. I got in touch with them the other week, actually, and they're looking at trialing that. So actually being some of the early adopters, because we want to see how it works.
Yes.
And I think that will give us more information in order to... But this is like an industrial revolution,
Yes,
in
it
size
is.
and scope. So I think as an historian, people in 100 years' time will be writing about the leather sellers and saying, well, yes, they were, they were some of the early innovators in this space. But I don't think I will, in my career, be able to say, yes, we've arrived. I just think it will be milestones that we hit along the road. So a complete politician's answer. I haven't answered your question, but it's the best I've got.
You have. You've provided some really useful pointers, particularly around, making clear what it is you hope to achieve, and recognizing that it's going to evolve, and what you want to achieve is going to evolve. And so it's having a dynamic approach to collecting that and then sharing it and learning from it. I think you're right. I'm going to come back to you after I've spoken to Harvey, and I'm kind of giving you a heads up so you can think about this question while I talk to Harvey. I'm going to ask you at the end for your top tip for somebody listening who perhaps hasn't yet engaged with AI, so you can have a think about it. What would you say to them they might like to do? But I'll come back to you for that. But before I do that, I would just like very quickly to get a sense of what's your real hope? Very briefly, what would you really love to happen through AI?
I'm really excited. I am hoping, because I love technology, and actually I love the idea of AI. So what I'm really hoping, it's what Harvey says, the things that you can do, the possibilities, the creativity, the possibilities in the educational space. I find that really exciting. And my hopes for the future are that we can harness those and actually make it a joy to be teaching. I think young people are already ahead of us there. So I guess it's joining them on the journey. But what I hope to get is working with them to really, get to the possibilities, the positive and the, life affirming possibilities that I think we can realize on this journey.
That sounds like a great aspiration. I love it. Thank you, Avani. Harvey, over to you. Safeguarding good, the bad, and the ugly of AI, and your hopes and dreams for AI. Quite a big question there for you, Harvey.
Yeah, it is a massive question, and I agree with Avani. I don't think we'll ever come to an answer, because I think it'll be ever evolving, especially now with the intelligence that's being shown around it. I was reading a World Economic Forum article the other day, and I quite liked the quote that they made. And they talked about and that was one of the headers on what the best tips are for AI. And they were talking about teaching about AI is as crucial as teaching with AI. And I think they're absolutely right. And I think that to me is where we've got to go with it. I really think that we probably have not talked about one group. We've quite rightly centered our conversation around teachers and learners, or learners and teachers in that order of importance. But we mustn't forget the parents. And I think here, this is where the safeguarding really does come into play. I mean, there's lots of around in the media about, addiction to devices, whether that's the right phrase, or overuse of devices by teenagers, et cetera, et cetera. I know my grumpy teenager gets cross with me because there's no devices upstairs. They're not allowed to use them in their rooms. They've got to do them in an open space, just for their own safety, and whether that's playing his Xbox or whether it's actually playing on his phone. And as I say, I mean, it's one of those things that has evolved over time. But I do agree entirely about working backwards, almost looking at the end point in mind and then going and finding ways over, around and through those obstacles as they come around, and hoping getting somewhere and moving forward. But it is shifting sands. And I think ultimately we have to work, and this is something that Avani has said all along the way, as well as myself. It is about working with all stakeholders. And I think we haven't really said much on parents. And I do think that they are a key stakeholder, because not only because we've got their children, but more importantly, they're the ones that really need to uphold some of the ethical approaches that we are looking at school. So if they're not informed about it, they're going to be maybe completely oblivious to what's going on with regards to uses of AI and how it can be used. You'll have some that will say, no, you can't use AI, and you can't use AI at home. It's ridiculous. And you'll have those criticisms at school levied at whatever level of management you might be in. But equally, they're going to be those that are much more laissez-faire about it. Oh, that's fine. You just do it. You do it for your project. But we need to educate them about how we're going to use it and what's safe to use it, and warn them of some of the dangers, just like we have with the dark web. And everything like that. I mean, CEOP have done a wonderful job for many, many years around that. Common Sense, as I say, from the US and Project Zero, Harvard, Project Zero have come out with many sensible suggestions. And I think it's just a matter of working with them and working, as Vani says, with all stakeholders, and making sure that they're aware of where we're going, and we have a very clear direction about what we want to do. Yes, that direction might move because the end goal has moved. So I think it's making that very clear. And for some, that will be difficult to understand, because everyone, I can think some of my older members of staff like that fixed point at the end of term, or that fixed point we've got to get to. Well, we might never get there.
Absolutely.
But we've got to work towards it.
Absolutely. I think that's such a good point. And thank you for bringing parents into the conversation. I think it's supremely important. So would it be right to think that perhaps your hope for the future is that actually it is about stakeholders working together and being coordinated in the way that they help students, help each other to engage with these technologies?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, and it also, I think it's a real positive part of engagement for them as well with their children. Oh, look, I'm using AI. Okay. What sources? It comes down to the reference and citations, and there are some really, really good ones now. I think of, I used to use ChatGPT. I've moved more towards perplexity.ai because it academically is much more reference citation valuable. And, you can have that conversation with your children. Oh, okay, you used AI, but what did they use? And suddenly they've got to then look through and try to understand what people are saying. So there's your evaluation. There's, and your analysis coming in automatically through your Bloom's taxonomy, which goes back to our earlier question. So I do think, we've got to educate that group alongside at the moment, just like we did going back into the early 2000s, just like we did with parents and the use of the internet and what's good and what's bad there. I think we've got to do it again. Yeah. But they're going to be a much more informed audience now, especially the Gen Z parents, as they're coming into our schools and to the workplace.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. Thanks, Harvey. I'm going to come back to you in a moment for your top tip for our listeners if they're thinking about engaging with AI. But I'm going to go back to Avani for her tip first. But just to give you a heads up, Harvey. Avani, what would your top tip be, please?
Is it a top tip or top tips?
It can be tips. If you have more than one, feel free. That's fine.
I've got 4, but I'll be brief.
Wow.
So firstly, ask around. I think all the things that both Harvey and I have said, other people, the expertise is in the system. So we've, do your due diligence, which is actually number 2, but it goes hand in hand with that. Find out what you don't know. Go to conferences, speak to people, and bring that back. And then I would say a top tip, and I haven't really talked much about it, but is plan with experts, because they will guide you along the way. A lot of my digital strategy has been done with our IT provider, Sweet Haven, and there is a lot of expertise there, and especially with the back end infrastructure and costings and stuff like that, they have been invaluable. So get yourself some experts to help you with the planning, and within your plan, learn as you go along. So lots of stakeholder feedback, lots of baselining, and that will move you as you go along. And the final thing is plan with the end in mind. You need to know what your vision is. You need to know why you're doing what you're doing, even if it's a fluffy blue skies thinking, but have some idea. What do you want the students to be able to know and do? I've talked a lot about digital character, digital emotional intelligence, digital poverty. If those are the things that you're trying to eradicate, that's what your plan is leading you towards. So,
Brilliant.
Sorry, 4 top tips from me.
Fantastic. No, 4 is fantastic. Thank you, Avani, and thank you for joining me.
My
Harvey,
pleasure.
over to you, the last word on this. Your top tip, please.
I've got one, but it's got sort of 4 subsections, so I'm going to sort of do what Avani did, but being a fellow
4
historian,
is obviously the number.
It is, or 5. It might end up being 5, but I've got. I think the main one is shaping EdTech in your school, in your context, and I think shaping it in your way for your needs, and I think that's the important bit. But you can't do that, as Avani says, without champions. That's parents, staff, and students. That's sharing. You need to understand what you can get out of it. So you need to understand the effectiveness of prompting. So that's shaping your EdTech in your school, understanding what a prompt means and how you can do that effectively. Robust procedures, safeguarding, guidelines, making sure that everything is in place, the due diligence, as Avani said. And then I just think the outcome of all of that, the last sort of subsection of shaping your EdTech in your school, comes around making sure you can adjust pedagogical practices. And most importantly, learn from what you're doing. And I think, I've always believed that the day I stop learning is the day I need to give up teaching. And we need to get the most out of our pedagogical practices so that students can get the most from AI and their learning. So I think for me, it's about adjusting that pedagogical practice along the way. So you are again shaping, the EdTech in your school within your context.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. Thank you. I think, Avani, Harvey, that's going to be so useful for our listeners. So all it remains for me to do is to say thank you to Avani and Harvey for joining us. And I'm sure that people listening to the podcast will get a heck of a lot from this episode that will be super useful to them. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Many thanks to our wonderful guests today. It's been great having you on the podcast. If you want more information on the series and our great guests, visit the Edtech Podcast website at theedtechpodcast.com and connect with us on social media. To see how Educate Ventures research uses AI ethically and helps other people to use AI ethically within education, in schools, colleges, and universities, visit our website, educateventures.com. We are experts and we are here to help you, so please reach out to us. I'd also like to let you know that we have a new AI safeguarding course, and that has been achieved through a collaboration with Real Group Training. And we'll put a link to that course in the podcast notes so that if you're interested, you can find out more about it. You've been listening to the EdTech Podcast, presented by me, Professor Rose Luckin. Have a great week.